I'm Paula Marie Esri, and it is my privilege to present this first interview with Miss Susan B. Anthony, a truly great leader of the 19th century. Miss Anthony was best known as a champion of women's rights. She devoted more than 50 years of her life to this cause. She also gave speeches throughout the United States and Europe. She helped organize, agitate, and educate about women's rights, and most particularly about her right to vote. She was still delivering speeches into her 80s. You really are still a real inspiration, Miss Anthony, and thank you for being here today. Thank you. I've always tried to think my best thoughts, speak my best words, do my best works, and follow my own conscience, looking only to God for approval. You certainly are remembered with affection by many Americans. It must make you proud to know that your image is on a U.S. coin. Of course I'm pleased, but many other women and men were also steadfast in their service and dedication to the cause. I just happened to be the one who was out in front much of the time. I didn't want to constantly be speaking to audiences all over the country, but no one else was available, so the job fell to me. During the years I fought for the cause, I must have given an average of 75 to 100 speeches a year. As I understand it, you met with quite a bit of opposition during those early years, both as a speaker who was a woman and as an advocate for women's rights. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? What was your experience like? Please allow me to clarify. First and foremost, I was an advocate for human rights. I did give speeches as an abolitionist, but also as a suffragist. And eventually, I did devote all my energy to women's rights. Now let me answer your question. I'll do it to the best of my recollections. Wait, I have a copy of an interview I gave to a magazine around 1900. Let me read a bit of that. So I pointed out that no advanced step taken by women has been so bitterly contested as that of speaking in public. For nothing they had attempted, nor even to secure the suffrage, has been so abused, condemned, and antagonized. In this they were defying not only the prejudice of the ages. This was the law and the gospel enforced by man. So you can see that when I first started speaking, I was going against the convention for women to speak in public. If you were a woman, it didn't matter how sincere or important your message was, you risked being hissed at, booed, and even mobbed. I faced some very difficult audiences and was frequently ridiculed by the press. Even many of the women for whom I advocated hurled insults at me. At times, when I met with very hostile audiences that neither accepted me as a woman speaker nor accepted my message of equality, all I could do was hold my ground, wait for people to settle down, and then repeat my arguments. And if that wasn't bad enough, if the hostile audiences weren't enough to handle, the conditions alone were enough to discourage any speaker. I delivered speeches in the rain and in drafty buildings. I delivered speeches when the halls were filled with mothers who held crying children in their laps. And I traveled across the country in rain, snow, mud, sleet. And as I worked my way from town to town, I often stayed in rooms with bedbug, infested beds. And yet, it was all for the cause. And I would do it again. It certainly would have been understandable if you'd refused this courageous undertaking. How were you able to keep going during such conditions? It definitely wasn't the life for those with a faint heart. It was important to have a clear vision of what needed to be accomplished. I was raised as a Quaker. I believed in the values and the rights, the dignities of all people, and that included the right of women to speak in public. So I knew I had a responsibility to speak out against all injustices. My father really influenced me a great deal. He instilled confidence in me, and he exposed me to some of the injustices that needed righting. For example, you probably are aware that our home was a meeting place of those who were against slavery, and that's where I met my good friend, Mr. Frederick Douglass. And later, as I had become a grown woman, I met Mrs. Stanton, and I met others like her who encouraged me to get involved in the suffrage movement. And together, as we committed to this great cause, I came to believe that eventually failure would be impossible. Miss Anthony, I have heard that you had a lot of communication apprehension or fear of public speaking when you first started presenting. As a communication instructor myself, having a lot of students who have a great deal of apprehension about speaking, could you talk a bit about that, and I'll maybe ask you about your advice as well? Let me answer your question by sharing some of my journal entries and a letter I had written from Portland. On one occasion, I wrote, "I spoke for an hour. My heart fails me. Can it be that my stammering tongue will ever be loosed?" After an anti-slavery meeting, one time I wrote this, "I tried to say a few words at opening, but soon curled up like a sensitive plant. It's a terrible martyrdom for me to speak." And then on, here it is, November 16th, 1871, I wrote a letter home from Portland, Oregon, and let me read a portion of that letter to you. "The moral agony of speaking in Portland is over, but the hurt of it stings yet. I was never dragged out before an audience so utterly without word as last night. Had there been any way of escape, I would have taken wings, or what I felt more like, have sunk through the floor." I was certainly not a natural speaker, as you can see, but I worked very hard at it. You must have worked very hard to develop your skills as a speaker, as over the years the press began to recognize you as a wonderfully persuasive presenter, someone who was direct, clear, and convincing. I like what the Boston Globe said about you in 1881. I'd like to read a portion of that. It said that your logic and your power to touch and sway hearts was felt and reverently recognized. Each and all recognized the individual devotion, the purity, and singleness of purpose that so eminently distinguished you. As you did become very accomplished and much more confident over the years, I was wondering if you could share some advice with others who would like to become a better speaker and more confident in the process. Mrs. Stanton advised me to dress loosely, exercise, get enough sleep, and of course practice. And that was good advice. I also think if you want confidence as a speaker, you must think of the importance of your message, and then you must do your best to develop that message. Now, I was passionate about what I believed, and I worked very hard, as I said, at doing just that, practicing and developing my message. And of course, Mrs. Stanton, she had a wonderful skill, and she was able to craft messages so that every word counted and had its own power as well. I also worked to find the best statistics and the best illustrations I could so that I had strong logical as well as emotional appeal when I spoke to my audiences. And finally, let me share with you some advice that I gave some other women in 1892. Here's a letter I wrote, and I'll just read a portion if I may. I think it sums up what I want to say. Don't stop to think for a minute that you can't, nor that your knees will shake. Just think what the people must know. Tell the story. That's all I've ever done. Just stand up and repeat the experiences and the facts of things done and the things to be done. Miss Anthony, thank you so much for the insights you've shared today. You are my inspiration. This has really been wonderful. And I look forward to the future interviews we have scheduled on such topics as civility and public discourse, women and leadership, oppression and minority groups, aging and engagement, communication power, and many other topics that friends and colleagues have suggested. Thank you again for granting me this interview, and above all, thank you for the important work to which you committed your life. Our lives are better because of it. Thank you.